Welcome to Raising Resilient Minds podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jihan, and I'm excited today to have my guest who happens to be the love of my life, Masood Haqq. Today, I wanted him to join me because part of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast was because of his background stories. And he's a writer and wrote a book called The Giants and My Myths, in which he gives accolades and gives people their flowers who impacted him throughout his life, whether it was things that we may see as good or bad in some scenarios, but the lessons that he learned that helped him to become who he was, the lessons that he learned that actually made him a more resilient individual. Based on my desire to always want to share this information and share his story, I said, of course, I have to have him on the actual podcast. Without further ado, Masood, would you like to tell our audience a little bit about your background and what you do?
I'm so honored that I finally got the invite. I get to see so much behind the scenes, and I get to see how much work you put into this podcast. And it's definitely something that I admire. It continues what I admire about you, and that you're always trying to pour from yourself and from your expertise to just lift the level of in our young people and in the families that are raising young people. So getting this call was a great honor for me. You touched a little bit on my background and the book, but I think that writing the book certainly helped me figure out why I am the way I am. I sit here today as your partner, not only in life, but with our business. I feel like we have a peanut butter jelly thing going on with your expertise in medicine and then my business background, but also in our work in the community. I'm a candidate for city council right now. One of the biggest things that I'm running on is just service, making sure that we have an ambassador representing a part of our city that has often and historically been misrepresented or underserved. In that way, I had to look back, like, how did I get to this point? Why am I like this? Why do I feel like I have to give back? And like you mentioned, I grew up in a place where getting to 42 with no injuries or no criminal record or no diseases or no addictions is almost seen as a miraculous feat. But it is because of people who I call giants in my book, who I would tell about interactions with these people. And they were people who were educated, people who were in place to give jobs, people who were just in the trenches next to me, where you're able to look at what they are bringing to the situation that I can glean from and I can incorporate in my own self so I can escape an unfortunate situation.
So I'm going to interrupt you right there. One thing, we're going to pause. Masood, you keep rocking your chair, just FYI. Just being cognizant of it. All right. When you think of just the term resilience, what does it mean to you?
It means against all odds, I'm going to contribute in a positive way to society. Regardless of what the hand I'm dealt, I'm gonna make a decision to be successful. I'm gonna make a decision to power through. I understand that short of death, there will be another day. And my mental approach to whatever obstacle is in front of me today is going to determine how I build on today and become successful.
Oh, definitely, definitely. One of the things is that as a pediatrician, and I'm seeing all of these children who have, to be honest, similar backgrounds to what you had. Maybe they experienced divorce. Maybe they moved between parents' households. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is the story of when you were a teenager, your parents got divorced, like many families, this happens. But you were in a situation where at one point you were told that you had to go move with your dad, and you were like, I don't want to do that. Right. And just tell us a little bit about that story, because I'm often baffled at how you actually came out on top with this one.
Yeah, I grew up in a very close-knit community. Even though a lot of people were lower working class, we were very close. We were rich in the sense that there were dozens of people my age whose families were similar to mine. And when I started high school, a few of us, we'd learned how to sell T-shirts together. We learned how to print shirts together. So we had camaraderie, and we got to high school and we started making money selling custom shirts and different things that we'd be able to get our hands on. And I was really enjoying ninth grade of high school, but it coincided with, as you mentioned, my parents' divorce. So at 14, my parents got divorced and my father got remarried rather quickly and wanted to move to Detroit. And I didn't want to leave the situation that we had created. I was making new friends. I was getting acclimated to the school. I was making money. I was popular. And I just was like, Detroit sounds crazy. Like, I don't want to go to Detroit every
From
time.
Atlanta, right?
Like, and it was in the winter. It was getting close to the winter. I was like, I'm not going. My dad, he left for a minute. He was going to go get his wife, and we were supposed to hit the road to Detroit middle of first semester. And I just snuck out the back door, and then I just ran away to one of my friends' house, whose mother was like an angel for me. There were some nefarious things that were going on at that house, and it exposed me to elements of the life in the hood that I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. It was a catch-22. But my father didn't come looking for me. So I stayed there for about, I don't know, 6 months or so, 8 months. It was a wild ride for sure.
It definitely made you have to grow up a little bit faster and take lots of different things into consideration. And that's one of the things that I'm always like, wow, this was a pivotal moment in your life. And so I find that story very interesting. When we look at statistics and things, children who may go from home to home or who may grow up in neighborhoods like yours, they typically, if they're getting suspended from schools, they're not actually going back and finishing, especially Black males. That's just the reality is. And I know that you encountered some of those difficulties along the way of having to go to different schools and things. But what do you think was the main factor that helped you to really push through? No, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to continue.
Yeah, I think I had a great foundation in terms of the desire to be informed. I had a desire to read and learn for myself. So my education wasn't solely dependent on school to begin with. I had a rocky ninth grade year. That was the first time that I fell off as a student, but it was very rocky. I got suspended 9 times for fighting, just lashing out because my parents' situation and my home situation. I was still even acclimating myself to the inner city. I had only been there for about 4 or 5 years at that time. But the things that I think helped me the most was that internal kind of clock, as far as I'm supposed to seek knowledge. I'm supposed to be the best in every situation. Even if I'm around dope boys, I needed to be the best dope boy's friend that I can be and help him, like, look, maybe you shouldn't do this. You know what I mean? I would read Donald Goines novels and things like that would help inform me about how to navigate that situation. But then once I got into smaller classrooms, I ended up in alternative school. And the classes were anywhere between 8 and 15 students per class. They were very hands-on, and they would bring mentors in who had been through similar things that were successful. And those mentors would come and speak to us directly. They'd speak to us like adults. They would acknowledge our trauma and our backgrounds and meet us where we were. It wasn't hyper punitive. It was collaborative. And the people who inspired me in those settings, they definitely changed my life and put me on a different trajectory forever.
So would you say that because when you were a child, your mother took you to her college courses? She was instilling that love of education in you. And that's something I feel like we have done a great job. I'm going to go ahead and pat ourselves on the back with our own children. It's making sure that they love learning, they love knowledge, that we never silence them when they have a question. We try to answer that question, or we go and help explore or look up those things with them, because we want them to always seek knowledge, right? From the cradle to the grave. We want them to have that love. And I feel like that's something that your mother instilled in you all, and your father as well. But I just remember you telling me the stories of her actually taking you to her college class, writing class, right? I think it was. And now you're a writer. And so it just shows us all the importance of not just saying, this little kid, you can't come with me, especially if you're a student. So especially if you're a parent and you are a student right now in school, bring your kid along with you. Read to them while you're going through your studies, or let them see what you're learning, because you never know what you may spark in them. You may be setting the stage for their future career, as your mom did for you.
No, I always take the philosophy, even with our kids, if a child is old enough to form the question, then they deserve a well thought out response. Now, obviously, it should be age appropriate, but it should never just be, oh, you're too young for that. because nowadays people have access to the internet. And if you don't answer their questions sufficiently, they might end up somewhere else. And somebody who doesn't have their best interest at heart at all is going to teach them that thing. So as soon as they're old enough to form the question, then we need to be prepared to meet them where they are and satisfy that curiosity and never punish curiosity or make it feel like it's out of place, or that whole stay in a child's place mentality. There's a version of the truth that is appropriate for that child at the moment that they form that question. Definitely try to encourage curiosity with that philosophy.
Because when you think about it, at what point do you learn to become curious if it's suppressed?
Yeah,
right?
I think that, I have this thing we talk about in the book. It's humble does not mean meek, right? So often in the name of being the big bad parent, the disciplinarian, we say humble yourself because a child is ambitious enough to think of something or to try something or to think highly of themselves. And then we use humility to try to dampen that down. And a lot of times what I've seen, or what my idea is, that sometimes parents or adults in general, they see a young person excelling or shining beyond what they may have been capable of at that age, or even what they're capable of right now. And their jealousy might even kick in and say they're trying to dampen that child's light. So that curiosity, that eagerness to learn, that eagerness to as parents and as people who are in charge of young folks, it's important that we mold that and that we champion those who take risks and those who are curious and try to explore that curiosity.
And you touched on something, and that is parents who live vicariously through their children. And I see this quite often.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to do this, or I did this, or I messed up, and the child is, but I'm not you. You are doing your job, and you're creating a strong foundation, and you are allowing your child to ask questions, to be curious, and you are molding that development and helping them learn how to cope with different things. Then at some point, you have to realize that this is an individual that I'm creating and not a replica of myself.
Right.
And I think that many children struggle because they want to become their own selves, but because their parents are guiding and directing what they want them to do, the child spends so many years just very confused and conflicted. And then that's when we see them start acting out. And they just go completely rogue. And the parent is just confused. What happened? Why are you not listening to me? Why are you off doing X, Y, Z? And the reality is, when I was 5, I wanted to do this, but you wouldn't let me do this. You made me only do what you wanted or missed out on as a child.
Right.
And so now I'm just going to rebel. And I think that as parents, it's really important that we pay attention to, yes, we want to make sure our kids are exposed to things. We want to make sure that we're not just letting them stop doing things or start things that we think might be detrimental. Yes, we are guiding them always, but sitting back and reflecting and saying, am I wanting them to do this just because of myself and what I may have missed out on as a child? Yeah. And so it's really hard to sometimes take that step back, but it's very important. I recently just had a patient whose anxiety is so high because she wants to live her life and do the things she wants to do, but her parent is living vicariously through her. And it's even down to, you have to go to this school because I didn't get into that college. And so I want to make sure you go to that college. And I don't even want to go to that college. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as that story continues.
Oh, yeah. And I think that we have children who have interests that are similar to our own, but we also have children who have introduced us to new things. And it's, you sure you want to do that? Okay, fine. And really just encouraging them to seek what makes them feel good, what makes them feel like they're on their right path, makes them feel like they're getting closer to their purposes. We have to straddle that line though. It's like commit, because we have kids that are in sports and play music and all that stuff. And that stuff teaches you a lot about life if you approach it the right way. If you want to play, then you have to play the whole season. If you want to stop, you're not going to be able to stop mid-season. If you say you want to be at this level, if you want me to spend money on all this equipment and all these different leagues and trainers and all that kind of stuff, then I expect a certain level of effort once you're on the court. But it stops at you should be doing nitpicking and going in and trying to override the coaches and all that sort of thing. You've got to be able to just use it to train just basic principles that are universal to anybody seeking success, like showing up every day, like leadership, like listening to your authority figures, like teamwork, all these different things, and allow the how or what it looks like to mold around that kid's personality, and not where it's just, I'm out here doing what you told me to do, and then they don't have fun and they don't learn the full lesson.
Definitely. And so you have a second book. I know it hasn't released or anything like that, but in that book, I know you talk a lot about the incarceration rates and things like that. Mm-hmm. What is something that you would share just regarding as you were doing your research mm-hmm. into the individuals that you will be introducing us to, about that resiliency factor or lack of that you may have noticed?
One thing I noticed is that a lot of people who end up incarcerated were the star. They were a person who had all the qualities of being a star, of being a great leader or a risk taker. They're daredevils, they're risk takers. They work outside of boundaries. And those same qualities you can say for your Fortune 500 CEOs. It's just a matter of how you harness it. When we go and we mentor the bad kids or the at-risk youth or the ones who are at or one suspension away from getting kicked out or something, I always tell them, give me the worst one, because he's the one who, if we turn him, then everybody else will follow him. If he's marching on the right path, then everybody's going to march right behind him. Too often we kick out the leader and then there's just chaos. But if we are able to reach that person and allow them to use the magneticism that they have, that creativity that they have, the boldness that they have, that same person who ended up in prison could have been a great leader in our world. I have some figures in the book that were very prolific in the wrong thing just because it wasn't harnessed properly. They didn't get to meet that person that I got to meet that inspired me. I would say that when you're looking at a kid and you're saying, oh, this kid is bad, think about it as it's your responsibility to teach. It's your responsibility to reach them. And if you're not able to reach them, then you haven't found the right ingredients. But a child whose brain isn't fully functioning yet, there is a way that you can reach them. It's just a matter of finding out the how. I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, definitely. And I know we're not going to share. I know you're not going to share too much, but I did want to touch on it just a little bit, because I know that is something that you comment on, is how these people are these extraordinary leaders, but sometimes for the wrong space in time. Mm-hmm. I think that it's one of the things where you wonder about how a child may go one direction versus the other. And a lot of that does have to do with mentorship. And I spoke about that in one of our other podcasts. But I feel like everyone who listens has to realize that they play a role in how children are raised, and they play a role in helping to build resiliency. And that's often through mentorship or even just encouragement. And when we see a lot of these youth, especially when you look at the statistics, who are getting suspended from schools, they're often getting suspended multiple times. It's not one or two times. Right. And that's just very discouraging. And so you seldom see the statistics talking about how much they were encouraged on the other end. When they came back from the suspension, what did we do to actually alter or change that path that they were on? And instead of just allowing them to come back, continue doing the same thing and then end up suspended again, which is what we really need to work hard on combating, because these children didn't wake up, or I shouldn't say wake up. They weren't born and said, you know what? I think I want to go on that path to prison.
When I used to skip school in 9th grade, and then the punishment for skipping school was 3 days suspension. So it's like, thanks. That's exactly what I was trying to do. So now you gave me a hall pass to just roam the city for 3 days and hang out with the older drug dealers all day, and not just after school, and learn how they're shooting dice, how they're cutting up their products. And what are you trying to achieve by suspending a student, by saying you're not allowed here? And then you take this school to prison pipeline approach with just firm hand, just you're in ISS or you're suspended, and there's nobody talks to you during that time. There's no come back and speak to the school counselor. It's, oh, you can come back now. You better not do it again or else you're going to get suspended for more days. And it's, don't threaten me with a good time. So how do we reach that person who is clearly just, I'm struggling with boundaries right now, or I'm struggling with sitting still for 50 minutes at a time right now? What adult is talking to this person during this? Because through all of that time, I was never told to go see the counselor. I was never told to any remedies or any kind of approaches that I can take. I wasn't asked to write an essay on any books or any story. Nothing that would have said, hey, did you learn your lesson? It's just, no, you did your time. Now come back and you better not commit any more crimes.
And recidivism is not our forte, right? And especially in this country. And you brought up a great point. As a child, when I got in trouble or I did something, my dad made me write that essay. I had to write that letter to make sure that he felt that I understood why I got in trouble and that I'm able to actually verbalize and hopefully correct my actions later. And I think that actually helped me a lot, because I was like, oh, Lord, I'm going to have to break down this essay, why I did this wrong. And he's not going to let me go do anything still. But it really helped me to understand my purpose and my path and why it's important for me personally not to get in trouble, because I understood the consequences. I understood how it impacted others, because I had to write that in the essay. How did this impact your family? How did this impact your classmates, your sisters, whomever? And so it really helped me to build that foundation. And I think that so often nowadays I see where a lot of parents are like, I'm so mad they got in trouble, they got suspended. And then they're like, well, you can't play a video game. But no one ever has that conversation with their child. But it's very important that you don't just blow up at them because they got suspended, but really try to get to the root of what is going on with you.
Right.
What is happening with you? Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's a question that we probably should ask our children, even when we're mad at them for what they did, is, are you doing okay? This is such a change in your behavior, or I'm seeing you act out of character. Is there something else going on? Right. You're still in trouble, but I want to be there for you. And I want to know, is there something else?
Me during this time.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I was resolute with myself about, even as a kid, that when I have children, I'm not going to enforce any kind of corporal punishment, because the corporal punishment and then just the punitive for the sake of being punitive, all it did is make me be a better liar, a better concealer of facts, a better sneaker, a better rebel. It's just like, all right, since I can't even share parts of my life with you without getting hit or severely punished, then I'm not going to tell you. That's some sort of sadomasochism. If you tell the truth and the truth means you're going to get physically hurt, then that's like human nature is to not tell the truth. So unless we're trying to create liars and sneakier people, then we should really consider our approach to discipline, especially as it relates to putting anything physical on that person's body.
Right. And as I tell parents often, if your child is truthful, then I would consider giving them a lesser of a punishment even. Mm-hmm. So what you were planning to do, maybe say, this is what I was planning to do, but I need you to tell the truth. And then I lessen that punishment because you're being truthful. Right. But then we're also, whatever might be the case, but I completely agree with you. Corporal punishment doesn't really work. I don't see it helping any of my patients. And the ones who get the most of it probably just act out even more, because the reality is they're often acting out because they want your attention, whether it's good or bad. They'll take that spanking if they can get some attention from you sometimes. And that's really sad. Right. But I do see that. And we have to make sure that we are setting aside time to actually be with our children, each individual child. And it's very difficult. I know for myself, but I am like, okay, let me take you to school because then I get to spend quality time with you. Let me pick you up. How about we go to dinner? Maybe we go to the movies. Mm. Maybe we go just hang out in the living room with one person versus the others. And I recommend that every parent spends individual time with every single one of their children, because they're going to seek out that attention. And often it's not from the right people and or in the right manner, because they're just craving it so much.
Yeah. I always say the best place that you can be in by the time your kid reaches their mid-teens is when they go through a monumental or even traumatic event. And the first thought that they have is, oh my God, I've got to tell mom or I've got to tell dad, as opposed to, oh my God, I can't let them find out. Because if they have secrets with adults or even other teenagers, then you're behind the eight ball as a parent. You've got an uphill battle to get the kind of rapport that you're going to need to not only steer them through those pivotal years, but also once they're young adults, they don't stop needing a parent. And if they don't trust you, or if they don't like you, or if they don't admire you, they don't respect you, then they're going to always be seeking somebody other than you for guidance. And the work comes from building rapport, building real trust, person to person, regardless of who came out of who. You've got to establish that you're someone who can be trusted, someone who's vested in their success. And once they feel that, then they'll open up to you, and you don't have to worry about outside influences that are just carrying them to destruction.
It's very real. And I think it's hard for parents. Sometimes we forget how we were as children, or we're afraid of how we were as children.
Yeah.
And so we have this fear that we never really work through. And so that's why we're always talking about parents have to do the work. Because in order for you to raise a resilient mind, a resilient child, you may have to step back and come to terms with things that you did in the past. And it's okay, right? Come to terms with it and then say, that was the past. That's not the current. That doesn't mean my child's going to be like that. That doesn't mean my child is going to do that. And let me help guide them, because I'm learning from my experiences, and therefore I'm helping them to now learn from that wisdom, right? That's the part of becoming older. So many people fear becoming older, but the reality is as you age, you should now have some wisdom. And if you don't have some wisdom, that's probably because you're not reflecting and doing any work to actually go forward, to be able to share those experiences and lessons that you actually learn, which is one of the things that I really loved about your book, is that you're teaching all of us to take moments in your life, take moments and actually sit and process to say, how did this change me? How did this make me better? Or how is this something that I learned to avoid, or what might ever be the case? But to be able to do that reflection is huge. And I encourage all of us to do that and sit back and say, how did I get to where I am now? And who and what experiences helped me to become the person that I am today?
Yeah.
And so that is definitely something we have to carry on with our own children, getting them to reflect on every year. When a birthday comes along, what did you do this year? What steps or who influenced you? Or how are you becoming a better person? How are you getting closer to your goal? Even if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, what is your goal for the year? Mm-hmm. And I did that recently with one of our children, just asking, what's your goal for the year? And they're looking at me like, what? And I'm like, what do you want to accomplish? Just this one year. Like, what do you want to get better at? What do you want to read? where do you want to go? Whatever it is, right? Set these yearly goals. I guess people say New Year's resolutions, but it's also just a goal that we can set for ourselves to help us to always be thinking of how we can better ourselves. I think it's really important. Just in closing, what are some final thoughts that you would like to leave with our listeners today?
I think that this idea that parents need to be perfect it leads to a lot of bad parenting, where we have to have the exact roadmap with every pit stop along the way. And I think that we should be training more so mentality and resilience. That's why I love the name of this podcast so much. Resilience. If you're training people how to think, if you're training people how to manage emotions, if you're training people that there will definitely be obstacles. And these are some of the mental tricks that you can use to get over these obstacles, then we're doing far greater of a service to them than if we just try to map out the exact details of their journey. Again, we talk about the helicopter parents or the people living vicariously. It's because they're trying to map out events. They're trying to map out physical, tangible things in time, as opposed to building up the person, building up the ability to go seek knowledge, the ability to decipher what's in front of you, the ability to read a room and add the ingredient that's necessary for them to be successful on their mission. And that takes more work. It takes trust. It takes faith even to pour that type of knowledge into a child. But it's well worth it when you see them making their own, forging their own path. And even if the end result is where you wanted them to be, they did it their way. And that's a far greater impact than if you just mapped something out and they did it. Because later on, that person is still gonna have that moment, whether it's in their late 20s or 30s or 40s. Who am I? I was this person who my parent made me to be. I did the job that they wanted me to do, but I don't even know what I like. I don't even know what I'm about. And then that's when you have crises, and then you have different things.
The midlife crises.
Yeah. So build that person up from the ground, from character, and help them navigate things without doing it for them. And they'll be much more resilient for the rest of their life.
Definitely. I completely agree. Thank you so much for joining me. And remember, you can always tune in to Raising Resilient Minds. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and you can also work with me, Dr. Jihan, and I can be found at drjihan.com if you're looking for integrative mental health services or any other integrative medicine services or coaching. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.